Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Restored to More podcast. We are so glad that you're with us today, and we are stoked that this morning we are interviewing Josh and Jaelyn Harrel.
Josh and Jaelyn are a husband and wife who are passionate about partnering with people to rebuild, restore, and renew their life to the purpose God has for them. In 2018, God took their broken marriage and restored it to something beautiful, and they believe He wants to restore the parts of your life that seem broken too. They are passionate about faith, marriage, family, and health, and equipping others to thrive in these areas. Welcome, Josh and Jaelyn.
What's up, guys? This is so fun. I'm glad we finally made this happen.
Yes. Guys, exciting news. We are so excited. So unfortunately, our podcast will be after the fact, but you guys are launching a podcast tomorrow. Like, that's a huge deal. Congratulations.
Yeah.
We are. We're diving into the podcast pool, I feel like.
Oh, absolutely. Like equal parts terrified and excited all at once. But it's been cool actually just getting connected with you guys and with some other people that have been doing this for a little while. So like, oh, okay. All right. If other people can do it, then we can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be great. And there's always a learning curve with everything, but you guys have a story and a mindset that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing about and getting plugged into. So I'm really excited about that. I think there's so many people that need help, and not everyone's going to connect with every like the one person. So we need as many people rising up to just be honest and raw as possible.
It's true. Before we dive into your story, for those that aren't watching our podcast on a video format, they're listening and they're probably thinking, wow, this couple sounds a little young. Well, they are. I feel like it's so cool because a lot of couples that we have interviewed on the show have been older. And you know that a lot of couples who are speaking out in recovery are older. And so for us, this is such a cool moment because we're looking in the video camera like, oh my gosh, another younger couple who have a story of restoration and hope. And so would you guys share, I mean, you don't have
ages,
to,
just
but
like life stage. Yeah.
Ages, how long you've been married and how many kids you have in their ages.
Yeah, this time I won't forget our kids because last time I did.
It's okay. I came in
so my name's Jaelyn. People call me Jay. I'm the ripe old age of 29. And gosh, it's just been, my 20s have been such a ride, I feel like, and I'm so grateful for all of the hard because it's gotten us where we are today. And I am thankful that we are not older and having this story that we were young and having this story because God's going to use it, I think, for generations and I can see we have a 7 and a 4-year-old boys. So I'm a boy mom and it's wild and crazy. We just celebrated my oldest son's 7th birthday. And if you don't know what that's like, it's like so much boy energy in a party. I think we had 10 7-year-old boys all around. Josh got a fat lip. It was great.
There was blood, there were tears. It was like the movie 300, but with 7-year-olds.
I mean, you guys know how it is. You're expecting this, right?
Yeah.
So it's being a boy mom was a whole adventure I never thought would happen because I actually grew up with just a sister. So it was just me and her, and we were very opposite. And so I kind of grew up very like lone wolf style, I feel like, in a lot of senses. Fun fact about me, I'm actually Canadian. So I wasn't born in the US of A. I've lived in Oregon for most of my life. And then recently with COVID, 2020, all the things, moved to Arizona. And so now we're living in the sunny state of Arizona. And
your dream realized.
We love it. It's so fun. And I don't know, did I miss anything? I'm a health coach. I also coach for my job. And so 6 years ago, I lost 95 pounds in 9 months and got my body healthy, and that helped my mind and my spirit get healthy. And that was actually the trajectory for part of our healing as well, which we'll probably get into at some point.
Yeah.
Wow.
What about you?
Well, I'm Josh. I am also the ripe old age of 29. I turned 30 actually like in a couple months here, which is a little weird to be leaving the 20s, and heading into my 30s, but I'm super excited for it.
We're ready.
Yeah, we're ready for it.
Come on, 30s.
Let's go. We've been married now actually for almost 10 years. We have our 10-year anniversary next May. And so we feel like we've lived a lot of life in less than 10 years. Another fun fact, we've known each other since elementary school. So we have been in each other's lives for a really long time. And we've been together now for almost 12 years and married for almost 10. We're so old. No, but I feel like he's brought us through a lot of life early on in our lives. And we see a lot of purpose in that. And we see a lot of meaning behind that. And just even in the last few years since walking through our really hard season and the things God's taught us and the ways we've been able to come alongside other people in their journeys of restoration and what God's doing in their lives, and really be able to speak from a place of experience and just a place of like, hey, we don't have all the answers, because we always joke like we're not like the resource for people, but we just feel like we have the ability to point people towards the resources and also towards what God can do. Like ultimately our whole story and our marriage and our life is about what God's capable of doing, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's start there. I mean, when you're knowing each other in elementary school, you've probably seen each other go through like all those like phases that we look like, right? Like I don't know if you have
awkward phases.
Yeah, if you guys, I was like,
yes.
I'm sure those would happen, right? Which is fantastic.
Yes.
You're gonna have amazing pictures to show your kids and your grandkids of you together. It's not like you and some other person, right? It's like, hey, this is us when we were your age. That's gonna be awesome.
Yep.
Why don't we start with what that sexual brokenness kind of started as a young person, right? Was there stuff that was going on in junior high and high school years or even younger that led into sexual brokenness in marriage? Why don't you guys individually just kind of share that story?
Why don't you do your side of, because I always feel like what people don't hear is both sides of the story, right? So like, yes, Josh has a part in the story, but I also have a part in the story as a wife, and I think the whole picture is really cool.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So I can remember, I would say that the kind of the sexual brokenness entered into my life probably in my like late elementary school years, I would say is about when, and I wouldn't have even realized that probably until a couple of years ago, because before that, the earliest memory that I have was, I was probably 11, 12, somewhere in there, maybe 13. The first time that I discovered pornography, so the first time that I was exposed to it, no one really showed me. I just kind of found it on my own. I think I had been just curious for a long time. And so I kind of came upon it on my own. And that started, several years of on and off these, waves of addiction where it was like, it would be super prevalent in my life. And then it was like the guilt and the shame would pile on. So then it was like, okay, time to white knuckle it and have, go without it as much as I can. And then it would cycle back. And I was pretty open about it fairly early on with, I felt like I had people I could be safe with to just like navigate and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this.
And I feel like it's something that like in the church, we talk about a lot, right? Like guys just struggle with pornography and it's almost like an accepted.
Like we kind of just like touched on it, it's just briefly touched on. So like you'll hear about it, but like digging down into why it's so prevalent and why we wrestle with it, I think is the part where we kind of miss a little bit. Yeah. So there were never conversations about, well, what is it that you're seeking out? Like, what are you looking for in this? Because it's not pornography and is not just about, it's not just about a release. It's not just about what the act of it, but there's always some deeper emotional disconnect that's happening, some kind of brokenness underneath that. And that's just how it's manifesting itself. And so what I discovered way later for me is that my sexual identity had really started to, I would say, just come into question and kind of be attacked at a really young age. I always grew up feeling super insecure about myself and super insecure about my body. And I grew up in a home that there was a lot of just negativity around that too. So I think I absorbed just a lot of that mindset. But I remember really early on, probably in like elementary school, really starting to notice that my sexuality didn't feel like it was supposed to. Like I started noticing that I was questioning my sexuality, and I wouldn't have noticed it then. Like I don't think I would have put that title to it at the time, or would have been able to frame it that way. But as I got older, and then as we got into our marriage and then parenting, it really I started to realize that this is something I really wrestle with, just questioning my sexuality and not knowing that wasn't a thing that, especially in the church, there was just not really a context to navigate and discuss, I think. So
Josh, can I ask you a question there? I would love, if you don't mind expanding on that. What does that mean? I know we're going deep here. I'm just going to dive right in.
But no, deep into the pool, go for it.
To question your sexuality, what does that look like? Is it questioning your body image? Is it questioning, how God made me? Is it questioning your thought life? Do you mind sharing a little bit of that?
No.
What does that mean?
No, absolutely. So for me, what it came down to, a lot of it was questioning my own masculinity and just questioning, like, was I manly enough? Because I grew up a super, like, my personality, I'm highly emotional. I'm highly empathetic. I'm much more in the artistic realm of things. And I just never felt like I felt like I didn't fit the stereotypical mold of a guy in the Christian church growing up, or just guys in general. So I always gravitated towards being around women. I always gravitated towards spending time with them. And I think what that started to create was this underlying pattern of, well, maybe your attributes don't fit that of a typical man. And so that started to really affect even just like basic sexuality of like my attraction. Like I started to question, what am I attracted to, men or women? Like, so if I'm not as masculine, then am I not masculine enough to be with a woman? And so then it started to bring in that tug and that kind of tug of war internally that I really didn't even like acknowledge until my mid-20s. So I spent probably the greater part of 10 years wrestling with that off and on, and really trying to just like, in the church, there has historically not been a context to talk about that in a safe way where it didn't result in like either a lot of shame or a lot of, well, if you just kind of like, if you just pray more, if you just ask God to heal you, if you just do these things, then God will fix that, right? And so it also gets this the topic of sexuality and gay or straight or all these different things, they become such a sole identifier too, that it doesn't feel like you're given the space to just say, hey, I'm just having questions. Like, I don't want to feel like I want to pick anything right now. I just need a safe place to talk. I need to understand why God made me the way he made me, and understand how I can be secure in who he's made me to be, and not have it suddenly throw into question my entire identity. And that was the thing that I felt like there wasn't a conversation for, and something that we've really become passionate about in the last several years is opening up a space for that conversation of how do we, especially in kind of today's world, like it's probably one of the bigger topics that I think young adults and youth really face, is just their sexuality and their sexual identity and what sex is meant for. And I feel like I grew up just having it so backwards of, it was, sex and sexuality were the priority rather than a gift from God to be enjoyed. And so it's been an interesting journey in that time of just being able to open up and then being able to ask questions that I didn't allow myself the space to ask before. And I mean, Jay has just been so great at navigating that with me, because there's a whole lot of complexity that comes with that as a wife that I can't say I'm experiencing, because I'm not on the other end of things, but I'm sure she'll share some more about what that's like,
Yeah, it's funny the more that we tell our story, the more I see how God interwove us together on purpose. And because I struggled with the opposite, right? So we've been having this conversation a lot lately about masculinity and femininity, because in our coupling, I am more the man than Josh is. Josh is more the empathetic person, and I am more like the let's get it done. And so I tend to connect a lot more with the husbands in coupling relationships and those types of things. And I always used to feel like I labeled myself as the tomboy growing up. Like I played hockey with the guys, and, I never necessarily questioned my sexuality as far as like gay, straight, those types of things. But I did question, like, God, why did you make me this way? Why do I like all of these boy things? And why do I feel like less of a woman? Because I'm too strong, and I'm too big, and I'm too all of these things. And so growing up, I really wrestled with that a lot. Like I was very quick to have relationships with male friends. Women relationships were really hard for me and still are. I'm working through that with Jesus, but and myself. But like,
way to keep it real. Way to keep it real.
Right?
We always appreciate
Exactly.
that. We're still broken, right? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And so, going through, I really questioned things, but I had a strong sexual drive. And actually, I had my first, I didn't know it was abuse at first, but when I was in middle school, I had a next door neighbor who really wanted to kiss me, right? And some of y'all might be like, a kiss is not sexual abuse. Well, when it's not consensual, yeah, it is. And I didn't realize that at the time, but I felt all of this pressure to connect with this guy who liked me. Now, meanwhile, at this point in like 6th grade, I'm a baby 6th grader, and I want my first kiss to be like the movies and all of these things. I am also overweight. And so I just have zero self-worth. I feel like I have to kind of take what I can get, if I'm being honest. And so there was a lot of identity issues there things I wasn't going to God for, like in my emotional eating addiction and things like that. And so this kiss happened, and that was kind of like the very small start of a snowball effect that led to bigger sexual abuse when I was in high school. And I got to the point where that just really shut me down. Like, it was non-consensual. And I didn't realize it was sexual abuse at the time because it was with a boyfriend. And, but after that, I hardly remember anything that next month. I remember us breaking up, and I remember high school getting really hard. And I remember me and God getting pretty distant because it was just high school. But all of a sudden, my sexual drive went way up. And I needed to be in control of all sexual situations from that point forward. And in fact, it really was tough on our marriage when we were dating and engaged, because I was pressuring him to do different sexual things because I needed that control aspect. But at the time, no context as to why this is happening. I just think I have a strong sexual drive. The minute we get married, I'm not lying, the minute we get married, my sexual drive goes away. It's like all of a sudden, I'm safe. I have a person that loves me. We're committed. Still overweight, like, mind you, there's lots of issues. I always say to my clients and the people that I serve as a health coach, the weight that's on you is just an outward representation of what needs to be healed on the inside. It's not who you are. It's not all you're going to be, but all that it means is that there's just evidence sitting on you of the healing that you can do and that can be possible for you to live a life in health and the life that God desired you to be, right? So I feel like our childhoods really, like, I saw God intermeshing them. I see it now for sure. Yeah. But just it was mutual sexual brokenness that both of us never really dealt with before we got married.
And we kind of, coming into our marriage, she knew about my history with pornography addiction. She knew about these things. She didn't know about the
I knew about gay porn. Yeah. I knew we were looking at gay porn, but
like there was no conversation of like same-sex attraction or anything. That wasn't that hadn't been really uprooted yet. So we knew about these things, but we kind of had for a long time. It was like, well, Josh has the sexual addiction issue. And then we started to realize more and more that both of our stories have really been impacted by sexual brokenness, that and just in different ways and via different avenues. Mine was through exposure to pornography. Hers was through relationships that she had and the sexual abuse that she endured. And it kind of brought us together in this place of like, that's been one of the areas of healing that God's really been working and continues to work on in our marriage, because it, as you guys know, it carries a lot of weight for a long time.
It does. So can I ask a question on what did you, because you just said a lot that's like, whoa, you had said that you knew about his sexual addiction. So you guys were already calling it an addiction. You weren't calling it like, oh, it's a pornography issue. You guys had already labeled it as something serious, like an addiction.
I wouldn't say.
I don't know if
we had at that point. Okay. I would say.
I think we would say a lot of times like he struggles with porn.
Yeah.
Like I struggle with pornography. I think looking back now we can be like, yeah, it was definitely addictive because it fits all the bill, But
and we would justify like the gay porn that he watched when we were dating and before we got engaged. We had all of our leaders tell us, be careful of this, be careful of this. And I was like, well, we'll just deal with it. It's not a big deal. And like, I would just justify it and write it off. Or he's looking at it because he doesn't want to look at women and disrespect me.
Right.
That there's just these stories, I think, that we tell ourselves trying to avoid the truth.
Because we don't want to dig in. Like the idea of digging in and actually finding out what's underneath all of that is scary. And it's when you haven't had it modeled for you, for sure. It's like, maybe we just don't go there. Maybe
and when the world does that too, I find that's why we see so many leaders stepping down from pulpits, because they don't feel like they have the ability to go through their own stuff too, because they're leading other people.
Yeah.
And I think when we have the ability to just maybe even take the time to heal what's been hurt inside of us and let Jesus really reign in that place, we're able to outwardly pour so much more from a healed space and a restored space than from a space of like, I'm just trying to keep all this together and all of that.
Yeah. Josh, you were saying how there just wasn't a safe place to even just ask questions during this time. And it's not, I love what you said. Like, I think the world is trying to make us pick which one do you identify with the most. And the church is like, well, you can only identify with one, really.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, this is confusing. Like, where is the person that I can just process with and just have these open conversations with? So what did that journey look like for you going into high school and going into your early 20s, where it sounds like same-sex attraction was happening, pornography was happening? Where were you able to like go, or did you feel lost in that, or what resources did you find during that time? Were there any?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because during that time, the culture both in the church and outside the church has really like shifted a lot in the last 10 years. I feel like where 10 years ago when I was just out of high school and into college, and even before that, there weren't really resources at that point to talk about these things, right? So like the topic of homosexuality, it was always kind of this other thing that no one knew how to really address or talk about. And it was very much within the church. It's like, okay, well, the Jesus way is the straight way. So like, if you're straight, then Jesus has healed you. And you are, like that is, it's kind of like one of the boxes to check of being a Christian, is that your sexuality is nothing but 100% heterosexual. And I think the hard part about that, and I'm not saying, I mean, we still hold the very, very biblical traditional view of marriage was designed by God for one man, one woman. Sex is designed for a man and a woman in the covenant of marriage. So sometimes we have to say that because sometimes people think, oh, have you changed your beliefs? Well, no, our beliefs are the same because and it's not because the Bible just says that. It's not just because, but like God has really instilled that in us, that is his design and his purpose. But within that, and within the context of sexuality, there is a spectrum of a lot of different things. And so it's been a process more in our later years because there wasn't really a space or any resources early on. One of the resources that we utilize a lot now is pretty much anything by Preston Sprinkle. So he wrote Living in a Gray World. He wrote People to Be Loved. He's an incredible, he himself is a straight guy, but he's just immersed himself in this community of people who do have different sexual identities, who are wrestling through this, and how to bring that conversation into the church and create a safe space for dialogue. Because now what we're seeing in kind of the church culture is that there is it's swung the other way. So now, rather than speaking shame and condemnation, which was not, I would believe, what Jesus would do, we're now staying largely silent and just saying, maybe we just let it kind of fly under the radar. We're not really going to address it. We're not really going to engage. We don't want to offend anyone. And so because of that, there's this fear of offending people. So we don't engage. Or you have a lot of churches starting to just adopt a more affirming belief, which is that, hey,
it's fine.
Whatever, God's word doesn't really say anything about whether it's a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. It's kind of taking that approach where it's like, well, we're just going to say that the Bible essentially doesn't say what it really says. And the challenge with that, and the problem with that, is that neither one of those is pointing people to Jesus. One of them is pointing them towards shame and condemnation, and the other is pointing them towards if we tweak the Bible in that area, then we can tweak it however we want. And suddenly we're not following scripture, we're following our own version of scripture, and that's making ourselves God, not letting God be God. And while that can seem like a really rigid perspective to take, it's actually really freeing in the sense that, hey, we can let someone else be the authority on all of these things, and know that there is space to talk about them, and there's space to ask questions and be curious and go, okay, why do I feel this way? And I think that kind of space for me as a teenager would have been so life-giving, to know that I wasn't going to be ostracized or told you're wrong or you're bad, but hey, like, just a space to be able to talk and to be able to ask questions and say, what does this mean? And what does God say about our sexuality and how he's designed us and wired us? And I just think as a teenager and as a young adult, that would have been so helpful to have.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that, but I think, like, just echoing off of that, one of the biggest resources that we've found now was individual therapy to deal with our own stuff, and then together therapy was so powerful in our story. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we talk.
Looking back now, from a different lens than when you guys were in it, could you share with us how pornography had impacted your marriage?
Yeah.
You want to start from your end and then I'll.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start, huh? So as a wife with a husband who's addicted to pornography, you start to see signs that they're struggling, right? Like Josh got a lot more quiet. There was more depression happening in his life, and I could just feel us slowly drifting apart. And I hated that, honestly. I was like, something's wrong, something's not right. And so we would have those like come to Jesus talks every few months, like, oh, I need to tell you something, or oh, I need to confess this. And, and I wouldn't even really want to ask him about the pornography thing because I was so afraid of the answer that I was going to get. And then I didn't really know what to do about it. I didn't have good boundaries at the time either. So it wasn't like I felt I kind of felt so attached to you and codependent to you that I just kind of laid down and took it in a lot of senses. And so when I really noticed that things were going wrong was Josh had been in therapy. Now, I will say there are multiple types of therapy. There's talk therapy where your therapist is getting paid to listen to you and they don't help you do jack squat. So I won't swear out here because I know you guys love it. But like, I love Jesus, but I cuss a little bit. So sorry, not sorry. But some people don't do anything and they don't help you move forward. And then there's therapists that really they dig into your wounds. They help you heal from the inside out. And if you have been going to therapy and you are not changing and growing, you do not have the right therapist. Find someone new.
Or there's the potential that you're just putting up a front and you're not really putting in the work. So it is that marrying of the
and
two
his
things.
Was both. Mine was both of those. Yeah. So he didn't have a good therapist. And then also he was withholding information from that therapist. And so I actually went to therapy because I believe in therapy and I think it works wonders. And I had a good friend who was a therapist who really helped us, her and her practice, Living Wholehearted in Portland, Oregon. They were awesome at just helping us. So I got into therapy and she had a few thoughts for me because I'm codependent wife, like trying to fix my husband, right? Any of you wives out there. But I was like, how can I help my husband with his depression? And she had mentioned something about PTSD. And I had mentioned that to Josh when we talked after therapy. And he was like, that's interesting. And like he was showing PTSD symptoms. And so he went in and met with his therapist, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. And that was where so this is early 2018. And that was where I just, for the first time, I just spilled everything, all the things about my sexual past, my struggle with my sexuality, my pornography addiction.
Now, why did you share that in that specific,
honestly, I think it was just I was at a breaking point, and I think the Holy Spirit was just like, it's time. It's time to share. It's time to open up. It's time to be honest. Like this has to happen if you want to move forward. And so that, that whole session happened. And shortly after I opened up to Jay about the same-sex attraction and that started a journey for us in 2018. We'll get this a lot from people in the church and outside of the church that pornography is just porn. Like, what's the big deal? It's just porn. It's not affecting an actual person. And we could get in all like the human ethics of it and how it's wrong. And the fact that these are like God's children that we're objectifying. We're turning a person into an object. We're making sex the idol and not this active connection between a husband and a wife. There's so much to unpack there. But the other problem with that on the biological side of things, right, is the chemistry in our brain. The way it works with an addiction is that what once got the response, what once gave you the endorphin release and this hit of dopamine doesn't do it anymore at some point. It doesn't work. Your brain gets desensitized. It gets oversaturated. And so then you need more and more and more. So suddenly it's mild pornography turns into more hardcore pornography and more hardcore pornography. And then eventually pornography just doesn't even really do anything anymore. Yeah. So then that's where it leads to people starting to look for an actual person. Okay, well, maybe if I could just have, for me, it's always been a more emotional thing. Like, because I'm a very emotional person, I was always looking for emotional intimacy and relationships. So because I've been so desensitized in pornography, when I opened up about my sexuality and that I was struggling and I was looking for belonging and I was looking for something to give me this emotional safety, kind of like I was going to pornography for, right? This point of like safety and connection. I started to look for relationships outside of my marriage. I started to look for other men to connect with who struggled in the same way I did, mainly initially just for understanding, but then that very quickly morphed into, oh, we're both not in a good place, and which led to, you know, multiple emotional affairs in a very short period of time in 2018, which was kind of like really what became our rock bottom in 2018. But people will say, well, that's not because of porn. Well, no, it was, because porn had desensitized me so much that it devalued intimacy and connection as something you can just cheaply grab after from whoever you want it from. And so
and I would say,
just
to not to interrupt you,
no, go for it. I was done. So.
But I think also we just don't think about what came before the affair, right? Or what came before the sin. Like there's always little baby sins. I always tell my kids this. It's the little things that turn into the big things. Yeah. Right. And if we don't catch the little things early, like lying or not being open in communication, then big things arise. Yeah. And it just happens with everybody. And so I think it never surprises me when people say that something's going wrong in their marriage, because if you think that anybody has a perfect marriage, you are wrong. Yeah. You are wrong. Like there's usually some sort of secret, and it's not like every marriage is doomed to fail, but we are all fallen people and we all are broken. We all have broken things. And if we haven't dealt with those things, it's just a matter of time before you have to deal with them. And it's either you deal with them now or you deal with them when they're really big and very detrimental to your life.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. We have so many comments like on our reels because reels go everywhere, right? And so it's like porn's porn, like, you know, just like so much of that. It's crazy. Yeah. We'll read them and we'll be like, whoa, we are reaching a culture that is not just our demographic on Instagram, you know, the ones that are following we are reaching people who believe like porn is good. It's fine. And praise God for that. I'm hoping
totally.
But that's what we're going up against. We are going up this culture that feeds. Porn is fine. Porn's just porn. And that's what they do. Let him do his thing.
And what we're learning is how much we both were affected by pornography. Even though I was the person that watched pornography, that used pornography to masturbate to, it did lead later on to chat rooms, because it was no longer professional people. It was live people that were doing these things. So it was a more real connection, because they're just like people like me that are doing these kinds of things. And then it was like, whoa, like you can watch things happening in real time. And so all of that led to this. And then it was like, that wasn't good enough. So that's what led me down the whole route of, well, I have to go to a strip club to see what's happening in real life. And I have to go to a massage parlor to actually be touched in a way and all that stuff. And so it does go back to that pornography. Even at 11, 12 years old, it started there. And Charity shares often too how much she was affected by pornography, whether it was as a spouse or even prior to that, being shown pornography at a young age, having it kind of being the sex ed of our time, and people knowing that, hey, that's what sex is all about, because we can watch it and this is what you're supposed to do. So it's just crazy. I'm grateful you shared that, Josh, and always so sorry, man, you had to go through this, and it's a both and grateful God has restored that so much and is using it in such a great, I know for a fact people are hearing this podcast right now and they're going, wow, man, I struggle with that too. And I don't have a safe place. And they probably wrote down the books you've already recommended. And now they're wondering, how in the world can we go to a marriage? Like, how can I go to my wife and either admit these things? Is there even a hope for our marriage to come back and be restored? Like, how in the world do I go from being attracted to males and being attracted to this to being attracted to my wife? Like, how do I reignite that love and that passion? Because I think most guys, whether it's same-sex attraction or pornography, is heterosexual, would still look at their wife and go, babe, I love you. Like, it's not that I don't love you. It's not that I don't want to be with you. I love you. But those are different categories. Those are different compartments. How do I omit one and put that to death and really start loving you the way Christ loves the church, and create that Song of Solomon infatuation that I want to have? I mean, right? Can't all of us guys say, I want to have this love for you. I want to have the eyes only for you. So talk to us about that journey of not only the freedom that happened individually, but then the restorative power together as a couple. That's got to be a whole story in and of itself, right?
Oh, yeah. We could go hours on this. So how much time do you have?
I know.
Well, you know, I would, first things first, I just want to say to like the spouse, because I know this isn't like just girls that go through this. Like there are many women who struggle with pornography and the man feels this way. So whoever you are as a spouse being betrayed in some way, I just want you to know that it's not personal. It's not about you. And I think that's what was hard about pornography for me, is that it felt very personal. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not sexual enough. And I felt that already. Like I told you guys, when my sex drive kind of stopped when we got married, I was like, well, he's going other places for sex because I don't feel like my sex drive was just shut off because I was so traumatized. And so that it was easy for me to get self-deprecating. And so I want to just encourage spouses, like, don't get self-deprecating, please. Like, if you're in that space, I think that's why individual therapy was so vital to our story, because, and this is something that surprises people. They think, oh, we need to go to marriage counseling and get right. Well, you can't get right unless you get right with God first, and you get right with yourself first. And I think everything stems from that relationship with you and God, or that relationship that you have with yourself. If you maybe don't have a relationship with God right now, just wait. It's on the way. But, you know, I really had to, with Josh, I had to let him do him, and I had to work on me and Jesus. And at that point, just being a mom, my oldest son was 3 at the time, so I had a 3 and 1 year old baby boys when this came out, and I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, I have biblical grounds to leave, and that is okay.
And you had people
telling me to leave.
Yeah.
But I also felt like he's over here working on it, and now I know a good majority of what I know.
Yeah.
Do I want to start this process again with someone else? It felt like a lose-lose situation, like, if I'm being honest. But I was like, you know, if he's willing to work on it, that's going to be the boundary, is he's got to be willing to work on it, and we're going to come together. And I don't know if this thing can get restored, honestly. Like, I had hopes and I had a desire, but you know, I wasn't quite sure. But this next, you know, I would say 6 months to a year was about healing individually ourselves, and then hopefully coming together.
And you know what I would say too, if you are the spouse, whether you're a husband or a wife, and you are in the place where you're like, you have these things you've been holding, maybe your spouse doesn't know that you've been addicted to pornogaphy, or maybe you're just coming to the realization, like, you just thought it was this fleeting thing, but you're realizing I actually am addicted to it. Or maybe you are in the same boat where you're struggling with your sexuality and same-sex attraction, because I remember going to my therapist and her just saying, a lot more people than you think, a lot more people than you think. And in the church, a lot more people, because especially in the church, you keep it a secret. So I just want to speak to the person who's like in the church and you have wrestled with this and you feel like you can't open up about it. That will eat you alive. Yeah. It will eat you alive to hold things like that in. And not because it's some bigger, worse thing, but because anytime that we hold things in and we pile them under shame and we hide them and we tuck them away and we don't allow, really, me opening up to her was an act of obedience to what God was asking me to do. Because I remember the moment where we were on a retreat out of state, and I had reached kind of like, I would say, the lowest point in terms of my infidelity. There were like photos that were exchanged with this guy that I was connected with. And I was on this trip, and I could not describe it other than it was like, I physically was sick. I mean, I could feel it on the inside. And I remember so distinctly, Holy Spirit just spoke to me and said, you have to be honest with her, not for your own sake, but I need you to do this out of obedience to me. And I need you to trust me enough to know that I'm asking you to do this, and whatever the outcome, I'm going to take care of both of you. Because at that point I was like, this is going to be it. She's going to be done. You know, like I've already.
And I had said, if this happens, because this is what happens with betrayal and addiction, especially if you've gone through any addiction, there's the initial coming out, which is never everything. Yeah. It's just never everything. I always know that. Yeah. And then it happens again, and then it'll happen again. And the cycle will repeat itself until there's a moment of decision that's made. And it has to be made by the person with the addiction, where they really realize they have an addiction and they're speaking that out. And they kind of come to come to Jesus moment per se, where they want healing. And
so that moment came for me, and I shared with her, and I very well knew that it could mean the end of our relationship. you know, in terms of our marriage relationship because of the things that I had done. But there was my desire to heal and my desire to heal my relationship with the Lord and to actually practice obedience and break this cycle of secrecy and shame and hiding was so much greater than the fear of what could happen, right? Because my whole life had been spent, and I think when you're addicted and you're hiding and you are keeping things a secret, your whole life becomes about keeping a certain image, and it becomes about keeping a certain level of control over things, control over outcomes and people. And when we don't want to open up about these things, it's because we don't want to deal with the reactions that we're going to get. And so it ultimately is a pride thing, right? Because we want to be able to control the outcomes. We want to be able to control the responses of the people in our life. And I had to relinquish that. And I had to say, God, I don't have control. Like, I have tried to take control, and clearly it's made a mess of my life. And so the relinquishing of that and just opening my hands and saying, God, I'm just going to let you do what you do with it. And I'm just going to be honest, like you're asking me to be. And there was, and so I was, and there was that point was just a pivotal moment in my life. And I think in our relationship, it was a very
yeah, I mean, from my perspective, so I'm hearing him tell me this in a hotel room. We're at a conference, and I don't know what, it was the Holy Spirit that came over me and just said, forgive him, show him grace, just do it. And so I did it, and you told me, and I was like, I have nothing but forgiveness for you right now, and it's not me. And it was like he was able to see, I mean, I think you said I always describe it as like, it's the closest I've ever been to physically seeing or hearing Jesus. Like, it was like not sitting, you know, it was this experience of it. We just can't do that in our humanness, you know, like I can't be that much of a saint when so much hurt has already happened. And it felt like an out of body experience. Yeah. And that was your last sobriety date from sexual addiction in April of 2018. And that started us on the trajectory of real restoration. Right. At that point. And there would have been, the reality is, without that honesty and transparency, there is no hope for restoration and healing. There just isn't. Restoration can't grow in a soil of deception. Like, it can't, there can't be lies and secrecy. And you have to learn that the honesty and vulnerability and transparency supersede your comfort. And that it's more about, you know, if you really want, yes, there will be discomfort in the moment, but if you want that deep intimacy with your spouse that God has designed us for and has woven into the context of marriage and sex and intimacy, you have to be honest. And that's an area we still are working on. Like, when it comes to our relationship, you know, like yes, God's done so much and he restored so many things, but sometimes we have to remind ourselves that he's still restoring. Like, it's a restoration process for the rest of our lives. There is no end to it until eternity. And so, you know, sometimes we want it to just be a moment where everything turns and for the better, and suddenly everything's healed and our marriage is perfect and great and wonderful. And there is some of those things. There are some finite moments where it's like, okay, this shifted and has totally changed in a moment. And some of the discomfort that Josh had to feel was like, I asked for a polygraph test after that, because I wanted to know absolutely everything. My therapist had suggested it a few months ago, but I was like, I don't want to do that to my husband. And, you know, I mean, I had all these concepts about it, but for actions that he was taking, that was probably one of the best things I feel like we did for ourselves, because it allowed you to see the gravity of the choices that you were making, but put the responsibility into your hands too, which I feel like was so powerful, because there were still things that we didn't know about that came out during that, you know, allowed us to start building trust on a really level platform. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, man, I wish we had like 3 hours. We could just keep going, right? But I love that. And what I hear you guys saying is you have to reach that point as the person that struggles with addiction or even kind of sexual brokenness, unwanted sexual behavior, that says, I'm surrendered and I'm really going to do whatever it takes to change. And we get asked all the time, what's that moment? What does it take? What's the moment? And really, it's not like they're asking for a program. They're asking for what's the 7-day detox from porn, and what's the 90 days to get this out of my life and a relationship that's restored. And really, unfortunately, the answer is probably not what they're looking for, but the answer is surrendering. It's really being willing to do whatever it takes that God calls us to. And and again, the road can be messy, right? The road isn't always, I made a decision and porn left my life, or masturbation was gone, or sexual brokenness was healed. A lot of times it's a decision, and then we're routed to one person or a therapist or something. It goes, it wasn't the best thing. And then we keep going and we keep going. It's a constant state of surrender and work. And that's what I hear you guys saying. I love what you said about it is a journey of restoration that lasts our whole life, which means that there are still parts of us that are deeply wounded. There are parts of us that are broken, and that brokenness doesn't get healed in a moment, but that's God's doing. A lot of times God chooses to heal us over a lifetime. And then even we die and we're like, well, it wasn't perfect. And then we're like, oh, finally we're in heaven. Thank you, Jesus. We're united with you now. So we love that, you guys. There's so much we could ask you, but I know our time's getting short here. We probably got to wrap up. I love what you said about, that's going to be a quote for sure, that restoration can't grow in the soil of deception. So as you guys move forward, can I just ask you, what are you doing right now that you feel is continuing that process of restoration? What do you guys feel like right now you do on a weekly or monthly basis, or things that you go, man, this is keeping us in this place of restoration so that you guys continue to grow?
Go for it.
Ooh, do you want me to go for it?
You go for it.
I feel like we're constantly just learning and growing for ourselves. And that was something that when I started getting healthy 6 years ago, God started to teach me slowly but surely. He started to teach me that your body is a temple. And through that, like, I paid the price for that. It's 1 Corinthians 6:19. And so I just really want to honor God with the things. And that's why we're so grateful for this ministry platform. We were a little bit hesitant to get into it because we just knew there were more people that needed other resources. And I think, to go back to your question, restoration looks like right now is continually growing in our walk with Jesus and continually being challenged by that, getting around solid people who also believe in restoration of marriage too, and want to see our marriage thrive and want to see each other thrive. I think also just getting around healthier communities and, around healthier people. I think the people that you surround yourself with, you're going to be like. And so if you're around a bunch of wives that are like bad talking their husbands about how and being disrespectful, you're going to tend to be disrespectful towards your husband and vice versa. Yeah. And so, I remember when a good friend of mine was like, Josh is your person. And I was like,
and this was even recently. This was in the last year.
This last year or two. And she's like, Josh is your person. You are his biggest cheerleader. And you should be the one that never says anything bad about him. And I was like, and it wasn't like I was like defaming him or anything, but like I was saying some of those things that I had, kind of grown up hearing from just different people or movie shows or different things and adding respect into that. So I think just more being open to what else there is that you need to deal with too. Like we talked about, there's always more that we can be diving into and more things. And if we're just open to the hard and doing the hard things, you'll find that you live that life of, it's not ease, but like fulfillment and purpose that you desire.
Yeah. And I would say too, what we're seeing a lot in this season and what we've seen in the last 3 years is that carrying forward that mentality of when hard things come up, we lean in, we don't lean out.
Yeah.
And that is it's always harder on the front end. Like it's never the easy choice in the moment to say, I'm going to lean into this hard conversation. I'm going to ask you, when I notice you're frustrated, instead of just ignoring it, I'm going to ask you, hey, I noticed the way you just responded. Like, it sounded like there's something going on. Can we talk about that? That's never comfortable. And usually it starts with, and it's learning each other.
We're doing it before this podcast.
Yeah, right
guys.
before this started. Every time before we do a podcast, we end up having some kind of conversation. But we've just learned that like the only time we've grown in our relationship, the only time the intimacy has gone deeper in our relationship is when we lean in. And it's when we dig into the hard moments, and it's always produced fruit. Like never has fruit in our marriage come from just saying, well, we're not going to deal with it, like, and it's having the humility to know that there's always more work to do, and to know that I'm never going to be perfect. She's never going to be perfect. Giving ourselves and each other the grace to navigate that. And also holding, we kind of, it's being the long game. Like, are you in the long game in your marriage? Are you in the long game in your relationship? If you both committed to restoration, have you truly committed for a lifetime? And have you said, like, come hell or high water, we are digging into this thing. God has brought us together. We are partners, and we're going after this, and we're going after the long game. We're not going after the instant gratification. We're going after long-term satisfaction in our marriage. And so we ask ourselves that question, and we ask ourselves, like, are we living restored? Is a common question in our home, in all areas. Are we living restored in our marriage? Are we living restored as parents? Are we living restored in our health, in our walk with the Lord? And it's just kind of become like, especially Jay, really, she brings that question about a lot in our home. And I appreciate it, because sometimes it's easy for me to forget. And she's like, are you living restored in that area? And it really does help us to shift our focus back to, oh, right, God is still doing a work. He's still doing a restoration. And I think what you said is about who you surround yourself with. It's so key. Like, for your marriage, you have to be choosy about who you let speak in your marriage, because they're going to speak life or death. And those things can deter your relationship.
And it might be people that are on podcasts like this. Like, some of y'all might be friends.
This might be where you get life spoken into your marriage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
This might be your mentor for a little while you find some people who are like you guys and like everybody else, like, you want to find those people that are going to speak life into you, so that you can start speaking life into others and find your tribe.
So good. Well, thank you guys so much. Can you share with our listeners how they could get connected to you guys or find you and hear more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, the name of the podcast, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I know. That's so funny.
Well, you can find us on Instagram. It's just at Restoredliving. So you can find us on there. We're over on there a lot. Obviously, the Restored Living podcast is launching tomorrow, October 26th. So when you hear this, we will have already had a few episodes. So it'll be great. You'll be able to listen to like 4 or 5 episodes back to back.
Yep.
And just
binge.
Just binge. It's like been watching a Netflix show. But you can find us over there, and then also they can find you.
Oh yeah, at Restored Health Coaching. So I merge a lot of health, faith, all of the things, because I feel like it starts with us and how we treat our bodies over at Restored Health Coaching. So yeah, I share a lot of the restored living stuff, and I mean, God's just really changed our hearts and our minds through health and wellness and all the things.
Yeah.
I love that.
So awesome.
Man, well, Josh and Jay, thanks for being with us, you guys. That was an absolute phenomenal time. And we're so grateful for all you guys shared. Thanks a ton.
Thank you guys for having us. This was awesome.